Please, Evelyn Hart whispered, her fingers closing around the black silk tie before she could lose her nerve. Just dance with me. My ex is here. The chandelier light froze on her red dress, on the soft breadth of her body, on the hand she had dared to place against the chest of a man every criminal in that ballroom knew not to touch. Behind her, Graham West smiled like he had already won. One arm hooked around a silver-gowned blonde while donors, models, and men in velvet dinner jackets turned to watch the plus-size seamstress make a spectacle of herself. Still begging strangers to pick you, Evie? Graham called, soft enough to sound elegant, sharp enough to cut. A few guests laughed into their champagne. Evie's face burned, but her grip did not loosen. Her palm stayed steady against the silk, her body planted on the marble as if the whole room could push, and she would not move. The man in the black suit looked down at her hand first, then at her face. He did not flinch. He did not smile. Two bodyguards at his back shifted their hands beneath their jackets, and a laughter died in pieces. Evie noticed the ring before she understood the danger. Black onyx, silver edge, a crest cut so cleanly into the stone that it looked less like jewelry and more like a warning. The man wearing it was Matteo De Luca, though she did not know the name yet. She only knew his eyes were dark enough to make the ballroom feel smaller. Graham's smile twitched when Matteo failed to step away. That tiny twitch told Evie more than his insults ever had. Men like Graham performed cruelty when they believed the room belonged to them. This man did not perform anything. The room simply rearranged around his silence. "You should let go," Graham said, louder now, trying to pull the attention back to himself. "You're embarrassing yourself." Evie swallowed once. The old wound opened exactly where he wanted it to. Every fitting room where rich women had spoken over her head. Every gala where she had hemmed gowns for body society praised while hers was treated like something to apologize for. Every night Graham had made her feel grateful for scraps of affection. But she did not let go. Her thumb brushed the tie bar beneath the silk, and her tailor's eye caught something strange, something precise. The tiny De Luca crest on Matteo's tie bar was real, engraved with weight and depth, unlike the flat imitation she had glimpsed earlier on Graham's cuff when he raised a champagne. The difference flashed through her mind and vanished under the roar of her own heartbeat. Matteo tilted his head a fraction. Not kindness, not rescue, interest. "Dance," he said, one word, low and final. The orchestra stumbled, then obeyed. Evie felt his hand settle at her waist with controlled distance. Not possession, not tenderness, but a shield made of black suit fabric and lethal restraint. Around them, phones lowered. Bodyguards moved. Graham stopped smiling as Matteo guided her one step onto the center of the marble floor. Evie realized the man she had chosen at random had just made every powerful person in the room afraid to breathe. And Matteo De Luca realized the trembling woman in red had noticed something no one else had seen. Matteo De Luca's hand left Evelyn Hart's waist the instant the music ended, but the pressure of his black silk tie remained burned into her palm like a secret she had stolen. Graham's insults still hung over the ballroom, dressed in laughter and champagne, waiting for her to crumble. She did not. Evie stepped back from Matteo with her chin lifted, her red dress catching the chandelier light, her breath shallow but controlled. Across the marble, Graham watched with a tight smile that no longer reached his eyes. Behind Matteo, one bodyguard murmured into his cuff. Another looked directly at Evie's hand, as if touching that tie had turned her into a problem no one knew how to file. Evie lowered her fingers to her side and forced herself not to rub them together. She had spent years learning how not to show pain in expensive rooms. Pain made people generous when they pitied you and cruel when they wanted entertainment. She preferred neither. 40 minutes before she had stepped onto that dance floor, she had been kneeling behind a velvet curtain with a pincushion strapped to her wrist, repairing a torn hem for a woman who kept calling her the sewing girl without looking down. Evie had smiled, measured the silk, and fixed the damage in 4 silent minutes, because that was what she did. She made rich women look effortless. She made powerful men look untouchable. She disappeared into service corridors with thread caught on her sleeves and tips folded like apologies into her palm. Her body had never let her disappear completely. She was a large, fair-skinned woman with soft arms, heavy hips, and a presence that filled doorways no matter how politely she tried to pass through them. People noticed her only when they wanted to judge the space she occupied. They did not notice that her hands were steady enough to rebuild a torn bodice under pressure, or that her eyes could find a counterfeit stitch in a room full of diamonds. Graham had noticed those things once, before he learned to be ashamed of being seen with her. Now he crossed the ballroom with his blonde date trailing behind him like proof of his upgrade. "Enjoy your little performance?" he asked, low enough that only Evie and the nearest guests could hear. "Men like that don't dance with women like you unless they want something." Evie felt the words land, but she did not give him the satisfaction of stepping back. "Then maybe you should worry about what he wants from you," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Graham's jaw tightened. His right hand rose to adjust his cuff, and there it was again. The flat, cheap DeLuca crest stamped into a silver cufflink. Too shallow, too symmetrical. Wrong in the way a lie was wrong. Evie's gaze flicked once, then away. Too late. A camera bubble above the velvet drape shifted with a soft mechanical click. One Mateo's bodyguards noticed. The laughter around her thinned into whispers. Evie turned toward the service corridor, needing air, but a wall of black suit fabric moved into her path. The bodyguard did not touch her. He only blocked the exit with terrifying courtesy. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice quiet. "Mr. DeLuca would like a word." The bodyguard did not touch Evie, and somehow that made it worse. He simply stood between her and the service corridor, broad shoulders filling the narrow opening, one hand resting near the button of his jacket. Mr. DeLuca would like a word. Behind him, the camera bubble above the velvet drape tilted another inch, its black lens watching her like an unblinking eye. Evie looked back at the ballroom. Graham had stopped adjusting his cuff. Mateo DeLuca stood near the edge of the dance floor, motionless beneath the chandelier, his black silk tie lying perfectly straight again as if her desperate fingers had never disturbed it. Only his eyes said otherwise. "Do I have a choice?" Evie asked quietly. The bodyguard's expression did not change. "Everyone has a choice, Miss Hart. Some choices are just expensive." He stepped aside, not toward the exit, but toward a private door hidden behind a wall of dark velvet. Evie walked because running would have made her look guilty, and because the whole room had already decided she was something small enough to be moved. Her red dress brushed the marble with every step. She felt every stair land on her back, measuring her body, her dress, her mistake. Yet her shoulders stayed square. She had carried garment bags heavier than some women's judgment. She had stood 10 hours in shoes that punished every inch of her feet. A room full of whispers would not be the thing that folded her. The private salon beyond the velvet was colder, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. Black marble veined with silver covered the floor. A wall of monitors showed silent angles of the gala, the dance floor, the donor tables, the service hall, Graham's hand lifting his champagne. Two men in black suits stood by the locked door. Another poured red wine into a crystal glass and left it untouched on a low table. Mateo sat in a velvet chair beneath a painting of a burning ship, one ankle resting over his knee, the onyx signet ring on his hand catching the monitor light. He did not ask her to sit. He did not apologize. He watched. Evie stayed standing. Her body felt too present in the narrow space between his guards and his silence, but she refused to tuck herself smaller. Mateo's gaze dropped briefly to her hands. "You notice my tie bar," he said. Not a question. Evie's pulse kicked once. "I noticed bad work." One guard's eyes flicked toward her. Mateo's mouth did not move, but the room changed around that almost smile. He lifted 2 fingers. A monitor froze on an enlarged image of Graham's cufflink. And that, Evie looked at the screen for 1 second too long. The crest was wrong. The metal was too bright. The engraving had no depth. Whoever made it had copied a symbol, not understood it. "It's pretending to be yours," she said. The red wine glass clicked softly as one guard set it down untouched. Mateo leaned back. "Careful." Evie met his eyes, afraid and steady at the same time. That isn't a threat. It's stitching. Before Mateo could answer, the salon door opened without permission. Graham West stepped in with two gala security men behind him, his smile polished back into place. "There she is," he said, lifting his voice for the room beyond. The seamstress who grabbed Mr. DeLuca then ran off with his private security. Should we ask what else she stole? Graham's accusation slid through the private salon and out into the open doorway, sweetened for the guests gathering beyond the velvet. "Should we ask what else she stole?" he repeated, letting his eyes drop to Evie's hands, then to the red dress she had made fit her body instead of apologizing for it. The nearest women in diamonds leaned closer. One of the gala security men shifted toward her purse. Evie did not move. Mateo DeLuca remained seated, silent as a locked vault, the black silk tie lying against his shirt like a mark no one had permission to mention. Graham smiled wider, tasting the room's attention. "Come on, Evie. You always wanted a bigger life than you earned." A few whispers answered him. First she grabs his tie in front of everyone. Now she hides in a private room with his guards. That's not romance. That's desperation. Heat crawled up Evie's throat, but her chin stayed level. She felt the old shame trying to make her smaller, trying to fold her shoulders inward the way Graham had trained her to do. Instead, she planted her feet on the marble and let the silence see all of her. Large, soft, bright and red, impossible to erase. "Search my bag if Mr. DeLuca asks," she said. "Not because you're performing." The room tightened. Mateo's eyes lifted slightly. Graham's polished expression cracked for half a second, then hardened. "Still pretending you have standards?" he said. "Girls like you don't get invited into rooms like this. You get paid to pin hems and stay behind curtains." The words hit exactly where he aimed. Beyond the door, someone gave a small, ugly laugh, then smothered it behind a champagne glass. Evie's fingers curled once at her side, but she refused to defend her right to exist in a room that had borrowed her hands all night. Mateo said one word. "No." The security man reaching for her purse froze. It was not rescue. It was control. Mateo had not looked away from Graham. "You brought two men into my room without permission," he said softly. "Choose your next sentence carefully." Graham swallowed, then lifted both hands in false surrender, his cuff flashing beneath the monitor light. "Of course. I'm only protecting your reputation." She's an employee. Emotional. Humiliated. Maybe she saw your ring, grabbed your tie, and decided to invent a connection. He turned just enough so the watchers outside could hear him. Or maybe she's been stealing more than attention. Evie's gaze caught on his raised wrist. The fake DeLuca crest on his cufflink gleamed too brightly, but that was not what stopped her breath. Under its edge, almost hidden by the silver rim, a thread of black silk had snagged in the cheap hinge. Not wool from Graham's tuxedo. Not cotton from his shirt. Black silk, fine and expensive, twisted exactly like the weave of Mateo's tie. Evie looked from Graham's cuff to Mateo's tie, then to the frozen monitor behind him showing Graham's hand passing too close during the dance floor chaos. Her humiliation went cold. This was not just an insult. It was contact. Graham had touched something he should never have touched, and Evie was the only one in the room who understood what the thread meant. Evie saw the black silk thread caught beneath Graham's cufflink, and the room narrowed to that single, impossible detail. The laughter beyond the velvet door blurred. The champagne, the diamonds, the polished faces waiting for her to break all became background noise. Graham was still talking, still dressing his cruelty as concern, but Evie stopped listening. Her eyes moved from the thread to Mateo's tie, then to Graham's wrist, then to the monitor frozen behind the velvet chair. The angle was poor. The crowd had blocked most of the dance floor. But Graham's hand had been close enough. Close enough to touch. Close enough to plant something. Close enough to steal a thread from a man no one sane would reach for. "Don't let him leave with that cufflink," Evie said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut cleaner than a scream. Every face turned. Graham blinked first. "Excuse me." Evie stepped forward before fear could talk her out of it. One of the security men moved to block her, but she did not retreat. She planted herself in the center of the marble, broad shoulders squared, her soft red dress glowing under the cold lights like a warning flag. Her body, the thing Graham wanted the room to mock, became the wall between him and the door. "The hinge," she said. "Open it." Graham laughed once, too quickly. "This is ridiculous." "Then open it." The nearest guest stopped whispering. Mateo did not stand. He only lifted one finger. A bodyguard crossed the room and caught Graham's wrist with surgical calm. Graham tried to yank back, but the grip held. "Mr. DeLuca," he snapped, "you cannot seriously be listening to a seamstress who grabbed you in front of 200 people. "I am listening," Mateo said, "because she has not wasted a word yet." The room went dead. Evie swallowed the shock that sentence sent through her and focused on the cufflink. Her hands wanted to shake, but years of emergency hems and torn gowns had taught them discipline. "The crest is wrong," she said. "The engraving is stamped, not cut. The rim is too bright. But that thread under the hinge is real black silk. It matches the weave of Mr. DeLuca's tie, not your tuxedo." Graham's face lost color in a thin, ugly line. "She's guessing." Evie looked at him, then really looked, and the old pain of loving him became something colder. "No, I'm measuring." A tiny sound left someone near the door. Not laughter this time. Fear. The bodyguard opened the cufflink with a faint metallic click. Inside the hinge, caught with the silk thread, was a minuscule torn edge of dark adhesive, pressed flat as if something had been attached and ripped away in haste. Evie did not know what it meant. Not all of it. But she knew fabric. She knew contact. She knew when a man had lied with his hands. Graham lunged for the cuff, and two black-suited men moved faster than thought. Mateo finally rose. The red wine on the table trembled from the shift in the room. He walked to Evie, not close enough to comfort, only close enough to make every person understand the distance now belonged to him. His dark eyes held hers for one dangerous second. "Everyone out," he said. Then, after the guards began moving, his gaze dropped to her steady hands. "Except Miss Hart." The salon emptied as if Mateo DeLuca had pulled the oxygen out with one sentence. Guests retreated behind the velvet. Graham was dragged backward, still protesting, his polished voice cracking at the edges. The gala security men suddenly remembered they were very small men in a room owned by someone else. Only Evie remained standing beside the low marble table, her red dress bright against all that black stone, her hands cold for what they had just exposed. The cufflink lay open under the monitor glow. The torn black silk thread curled from its hinge like evidence with a pulse. Mateo did not praise her. That would have been too simple, too safe. He only looked at the thread, then at her, as if deciding whether she was a witness, a weapon, or a liability. "Tell me again," he said. Evie's throat tightened. "You heard me." "I heard the words." His voice was low, almost quiet. "Now I want the truth underneath them." One of his men placed three things on the table: Graham's open cufflink, Mateo's tie bar, and the onyx signet ring Mateo slid from his own finger without looking away from her. The room seemed to darken without that ring on his hand. Evie understood then that he was testing her. Not kindly, not cruelly, precisely. She stepped closer, but not too close. "I'm not helping you frame me," she said. A guard jaw tightened. Mateo lifted one hand, and the man went still. "Good," he said. "That means you understand the room." Evie looked down. Her pulse was fast, but her hands were steady, the same hands that had rebuilt torn satin minutes before a donor walked on stage. The same hands rich women trusted with their bodies while pretending not to see hers. She touched nothing. She only studied. "Your tie bar is hand-engraved. The crest has depth. The cuts catch light unevenly because a real tool made them. Your ring is older, heavier, same family mark, but cleaner, protected. His cufflink is stamped. Mass-produced. Someone copied the shape without understanding the weight." Mateo's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "And the adhesive?" Evie swallowed. Not from price tag. Not from tailoring tape. Too dark. Too thin. It was holding something small, probably flat. A recorder, a tracker, maybe a chip. I don't know what. But whatever it was, it touched your tie before it touched his cuff. Silence gathered around her words. The monitor still showed Graham's hand near Mateo during the dance floor chaos, close enough to pass as an accident, close enough to turn Evie's desperate moment into cover for his own. Mateo's face did not change, but everyone else's did. That was how Evie knew she had hit bone. "You saw all that from a cufflink," one guard muttered. Evie kept her eyes on Mateo. "No, I saw it because people like him think people like me are furniture. They do careless things in front of furniture." Something moved behind Mateo's eyes then. Not softness, not yet, but recognition sharp enough to cut glass. He put the onyx ring back on. The room seemed to remember its owner. "Lock down the donor exits," he ordered. "No police. No noise." West breathes until I know who paid him. Then his gaze returned to Evie. "You stay where I can see you." Her spine stiffened. "I'm not your prisoner." The corner of his mouth almost moved. "No, Miss Hart. You are the only person in this hotel who noticed someone put a hand on me and lived long enough to explain why it mattered." He reached up, loosened the black silk tie, and laid it across the marble between them. Not an offering. A test. A line. "Show me exactly where he touched it." Evie looked at the black silk tie lying across the marble table, as if it were a weapon someone had disarmed but not made safe. The fabric still held the shape of Mateo's throat, the faint warmth of the man every guard in the hotel obeyed without question. "Show me exactly where he touched it," Mateo said, and the room waited for her hands to shake. They did not. Evie stepped closer, careful not to lean into his power, careful not to look like she needed permission to breathe. With 2 fingers, she lifted the tie near the lower blade and turned it toward the monitor light. "Here," she said. "Now when I grabbed it. Before." The fibers are pulled sideways like something clipped and dragged. Mateo's gaze dropped to her fingertips. His bodyguards watched as if she were handling a live wire. Evie felt their suspicion pressing against her back, felt the old instinct to apologize for taking up too much space, too much air, too much attention. She ignored it. Her soft, heavy body stayed planted beside the table, red dress bright against the black marble, her presence suddenly impossible to move around. Mateo reached for the tie at the same time she did, and their fingers nearly touched. He stopped first. That single pause was more dangerous than contact. "You are careful," he said. "I work with things people ruin and still expect perfect by midnight." A breath that might have been amusement passed through the room and died quickly. Mateo's eyes lifted. "Wes will try to make you the story now. Yelisix, a desperate employee, a woman who grabbed the wrong man and invented a crime to save herself." Evie's stomach tightened because it was exactly the kind of lie Graham knew how to sell. He had sold her worse things in softer rooms. "Then let me leave before he does. If you leave through the lobby, his people will film you. If you leave through the service hall, whoever paid him may decide you saw too much." Mateo folded the tie once, precise and controlled. "You are safer inside my perimeter." Evie looked at the locked door, the silent guards, the cameras watching every inch of the hotel. That sounds like a prettier word for trapped. The room chilled. One guard shifted, offended on Mateo's behalf. Mateo only studied her. "No," he said. "Trap means I take your choice. Protected means I explain the cost of each door and let you pick one." Evie held his stare, searching for the lie. She found danger, arrogance, calculation, but not pity. Not yet. Not the soft, humiliating kind Graham had used whenever he wanted her grateful for being tolerated. "Then I choose to stay until you know what was on that adhesive," she said. "And after that, I walk out on my own feet." Mateo's ring tapped once against the marble. "Agreed." The word landed like a contract. He handed the folded tie to her, not the guards. "Keep it clean. No one touches it but you." Evie took it, and the black silk settled across her palms, no longer the thing she had clutched in panic, but evidence only she knew how to read. Outside the salon, voices rose near the ballroom doors. A guard listened to his earpiece, then looked at Mateo. "West is at the donor exit with 3 men. He says Miss Hart planted evidence on him." Mateo did not look surprised. Evie tightened her grip on the tie. This time, she was not begging anyone to dance. She was deciding whether to step deeper into the dark with her spine straight. West was already turning Evie into a crime before she reached the donor exit. His voice carried through the marble corridor, smooth and wounded for the cluster of wealthy guests he had trapped between velvet ropes and black-suited guards. She was humiliated. She grabbed DeLuca, and now she needs a story, Graham said, holding up his open cufflink as if it were proof of her madness instead of his own mistake. That woman planted this on me. Check her hands. Check the tie she's carrying. The word tie made every eye snap to the black silk folded across Evie's palms. For one awful second, the room saw exactly what Graham wanted them to see. A plus-size seamstress in a red dress, flushed from public rejection, holding the most dangerous man's private object like stolen evidence. Mateo's men closed around her, but Evie stepped past the nearest guard before protection could become a cage. "Don't," she said quietly. Mateo's gaze cut to her. Not warning. Measurement. Evie kept walking until the velvet rope brushed the front of her dress. Her body blocked the corridor with calm weight. No shrinking, no apology, no frantic defense. Graham's 3 men stood behind him near the donor exit, each one trying too hard to look like private security, each one wearing the same bright, shallow counterfeit crest on a cuff or lapel. Not fashion. Access. A borrowed symbol meant to open doors it had not earned. "If I planted it," Evie said, lifting the black silk tie, "then the damage would run where my hand touched it." Front pressure. Downward pull. Panic grip. The crowd quieted. She turned the tie toward the wall sconce. But these fibers are dragged sideways from beneath the knot. Left to right. Someone clipped something here while Mr. DeLuca was facing away from the dance floor. Graham laughed, but sweat had gathered at his temple. "Listen to her. She's making sewing sound like science." "It is," Evie said, "when men lie with fabric." A small sound passed through the guests, half shock, half fear. She looked at the black camera dome above the corridor, then at the mirrored bar panel behind the velvet ropes. The main camera missed it because the crowd moved, but that mirror caught his wrist. Mateo did not look at the camera. He looked at Evie, then lifted 2 fingers. A guard rewound the ballroom feed on a tablet. The screen reflected in the onyx ring as Mateo held out his hand. Graham's smile thinned into nothing. Frame by frame, the mirror showed what the direct camera had hidden. Graham drifting too close during the first stunned seconds of the dance, his cuff brushing Mateo's tie, while everyone watched Evie's red dress and trembling hand. One of Graham's men reached for his earpiece. 2 DeLuca guards moved, silent and immediate. The donor exit locks clicked. Evie heard them and understood the danger had changed shape. Graham was not just cruel. He had used her humiliation as cover. He had counted on the room watching her body, her shame, her desperate grip, while his hand touched a mafia boss. Mateo stepped beside her, close enough for the crowd to feel the temperature drop, not close enough to claim what she had done. "Keep going," he said. Evie looked at the 3 counterfeit crests, then back at Graham. "Those marks are not decorations. They're passes. Someone paid him to wear your name through a door." Graham lunged forward, no longer polished, no longer handsome. "Shut her up." The words landed before he could dress them in charm. The entire corridor heard them. Mateo's onyx ring flashed as his hand closed once, and every guard in black moved at the same time. Evie held the tie tighter, knowing the next truth would not belong in a private room. It would have to be said in front of everyone who had laughed at her. "No," Evie said before Mateo could give the order in her place. Her voice trembled once, then settled. "Not in the hallway." Every guard paused. Graham's face twisted with disbelief, but Evie kept the black silk tie folded over her palms and looked past him, through the velvet ropes, back toward the ballroom where the chandelier still burned over the people who had laughed at her. "He used that room to make me look desperate," she said, "so he can hear the truth there." For 1 second, no one moved. Then Mateo DeLuca turned his head toward the ballroom doors. "Open them." The locks released with a deep metallic sound that rolled through the corridor like thunder. Guests backed away as the DeLuca guards drove Graham and his 3 counterfeit men into the center of the marble floor. The orchestra had gone silent. Champagne glasses hovered halfway to lips. Women who had whispered behind diamonds now looked anywhere except at Evie, because she was no longer walking like the seamstress they could ignore. She moved slowly, heavily, beautifully, the red dress bright beneath the chandelier, the black tie held in both hands like evidence and judgment. Graham tried to smile again, but the room had already seen him crack. "This is insane," he said. "She's embarrassing herself again." Evie stopped at the exact place where she had first grabbed Mateo's tie. "No," she said. "You counted on everyone watching me be embarrassed. That was the trick." Mateo stood behind her right shoulder, close enough that his shadow cut across the marble, far enough that no one could pretend he was speaking for her. The onyx signet ring flashed as he handed a tablet to one of his men. The mirrored footage appeared on the ballroom screens, normally reserved for donor names and auction numbers. Frame by frame, the room watched Graham drift near Mateo during the stunned seconds of the dance. They watched his cuff brush the black silk. They watched his hand close. They watched him use Evie's humiliation as cover. A murmur rose, then died when Mateo lifted one finger. Evie unfolded the tie and showed the sideways drag in the fibers. That thread was caught in his cufflink. The crest on his cuff was stamped, not engraved. His men wore the same fake marks at the donor exit. Those were not accessories. They were passes. A DeLuca guard set 3 cufflinks and 2 lapel pins onto a silver tray. Cheap metal clicked against polished silver. The sound was tiny and devastating. Mateo spoke then, low enough that everyone leaned toward the danger. "Graham West has been moving rival money through this gala under my name." Graham's face went gray. "Mateo, wait, no," Mateo said. "You said enough when you told them to shut her up." Phones disappeared. Donors stepped away from Graham, as if shame were contagious. One by one, the screens behind Evie filled with frozen transfers, forged access lists, revoked sponsorships, private accounts closed in red. Graham's clean donor mask peeled off in public, line by line, until there was nothing left but a frightened man in an expensive tuxedo. "Please," he whispered, but not to Evie. To Mateo. That was his final mistake. Mateo looked at Evie. "He owes the apology to you." Graham's knees did not quite touch the marble, but his pride did. "Evie," he forced out, voice breaking, "I'm sorry." She looked at him and felt the old wound finally stop bleeding. "You're sorry you were seen." Then she turned away from him. That was when the room understood the reversal. Evie had not come back to be chosen by Graham. She had come back to watch him become irrelevant. Mateo removed the loosened collar button at his throat and held still. In front of every donor, every model, every woman who had laughed into champagne, he lowered his head a fraction and let Evie lift the black silk tie back into place. Her hands did not shake. She straightened the knot with the same calm precision she had given gowns behind curtains. Only now, no curtain hid her. Mateo's voice cut through the ballroom. "From tonight forward, no one enters a DeLuca room, wears a DeLuca mark, or stand beside my table unless Evelyn Hart says the work is real." The silence changed shape. It became respect, fear, recognition. "She is not my employee," he continued. "She is the only woman in this room I trust." Evie looked up at him, and this time she did not feel small beneath the chandelier. She had asked for one dance to survive her ex. She walked out of that ballroom as the woman every powerful man now had to pass before touching Mateo DeLuca's world.